Welcome back, everyone. Today we will be doing a recap of a game that was played in the United States Chess Championship in round number 11 between Hans Niemann, the rising junior player, and Alex Lenderman. Now, coming into this game, Hans is on a one-game winning streak, playing against the bottom half of the field as we head into the home stretch of the final couple of rounds. As such, he's trying to sort of salvage what has not been a very good event for him. So away we go. The game starts with d4 being played by Hans. We get d5 by Lenderman, c4. Now we get pawn to c6. Alex Lenderman, throughout this tournament, he has been playing the Slav defense. He played it earlier in, I believe, the 4th or 5th round. Maybe it was a little bit later than that, against Fabiano Caruana. Now in that game, Fabiano actually played queen c2, and after d takes c4 and e4, he went on to win this game. Now most of you guys probably have noticed that I've been away for a couple of days. I was filming some IRL content in the great city of Toronto, Canada. Now during that trip, I actually myself felt a little bit inspired by Fabiano, and I played this queen c2 line with e4 against number 1 Canadian ranked player Evgeny Brave. That of course is aside from this recap that we're doing right now, but make sure to stay tuned for a video on that game later on. At any rate, in this game, Hans plays e3. We get bishop to g4. All this is very standard theory so far. Knight c3, e6, h3, bishop h5. Black can of course take on f3 here, and after takes knight bd7. White has options like bishop d3, potentially bishop d2, or bishop e2. I myself had positions very similar to this against Magnus Carlsen in a couple of the Meltwater events last year. At any rate, we got bishop h5 being played by Alex Lenderman, pawn to g4, bishop g6, knight to e5, and now we get knight b to d7 being played here. Of course, as I said, all this is still pretty standard theory. White trades on g6 and now plays this move g5 here, trying to ask black a very important question of where is this knight going. Now it's worth knowing that you probably wonder, why does white play g5? Now one of the biggest reasons that white plays g5 is, let's say white plays a move like b3 here. Long term, their ideas were later on black can play g5 himself, followed by ideas like knight f8 to g6 and potentially knight h4 here, and white doesn't really have any play on the king side. As such, we get g5, knight to e4, knight takes knight, pawn takes. Hans plays h4 to protect the pawn on g5, and now we get bishop b4, and this line sort of leads straight into an endgame here with two rooks and a bishop against 2 rooks and a knight. So we get bishop d2, queen to a5, and now a3 is played here by Hans. Now it's worth noting that of course white can trade the bishops on b4, but after trading and going queen d2, let's say black trades into the endgame, long term it's better to have the pawn on a3 to potentially support a b4 pawn push versus having the pawn on a2. So while it doesn't make a very big difference in the long run, perhaps a3 supports b4, whereas the pawn on a2 isn't doing anything particularly useful. So we get a3 being played here. Bishop takes d2, queen takes d2, trade, and now f5 is played here by Lenderman, and now we get pawn to c5. Now this is a very unusual position. It is an endgame, but with both rooks on the board and a bishop versus knight, it remains very unclear who has the advantage here. On first glance, you would think, well, probably black should be better because of the fact that the h-pawn is very weak here. At the same time, black has the issue with the knight, which is this knight cannot jump anywhere. You cannot go to b6. You cannot actually go to c5. You can't go to e5 or f6 here. So this knight really doesn't have any squares. If black could magically put this knight on d5, for example, black would be clearly better. But unfortunately, with no access to any of these squares in the center of the board here, white perhaps is for choice. So we get king to e7 being played here. We get pawn to b4 being played by Hans. Creates, of course, a little bit of a mini pyramid here. And now you get rook 8 d8, king to c3, and now e5 being played. Again, the big problem for black in this position is where does black sort of try to open up the position? You can try to play for e5 here. You can also potentially play for f4. There's maybe an idea like rook h7 here, but if you play rook h7, the issue is that white will go a4, rook h8, and now after b5, rook takes h4, rook takes h4, rook takes h4. White can play this move a5, and your queen side is very iffy here. If you play just a random move like, I don't know, rook h5, white goes a6, ruining your pawn structure, and after pawn takes pawn on a6, b takes c6, white is completely winning. Additionally, if you play pawn takes pawn on b5, very thematic move here, which is bishop takes b5, and after black plays, let's just say a6 here, you can go bishop to c4 followed by rook b1, and white should be clearly better here. In fact, computer thinks white is winning. So it's very tricky here because white has this weakness on h4. At the same time, black really needs to do something quickly because otherwise white will just steamroll you on the queen side with b5, rook b1, or a4, a5, a6, as we just saw in the previous line. So Lenderman here in this position chooses to play the thematic move e5. It's worth noting that trying to play for f4 is very difficult, because after say rook f8, a4, f4, for example, in a position like this, I can just go bishop g2. If you trade on e3, you can't protect the pawn on e4, and if you go f3 after bishop f1, it's the same problem where I'm going b5, a5, a6, or b5 in conjunction with rook to b1. So as such, after king c3, e5 is played. We get bishop to c4 being played by Hans. Lenderman trades the pawns on d4, perhaps a little bit questionable. I know the computer here likes the unusual move knight f8, and after d takes e5, you can very simply just go back to d7. And now if e6 is played, you jump with the knight to e5, and black really has no issues here. The pawn on e6 is very weak. If you play, like, let's just say bishop b3 to guard the pawn, after knight to g4 followed by rook d3 and or rook h d8, black probably is close to winning. And if you play a move like bishop e2 after king takes e6, black should be completely fine here. White still has this weak pawn on h4. And if you play a move like b5, there are even ideas like rook to d5 going after the weak pawn on c5. Whereas if we go back to this earlier position here, if you look at this position, when white plays b5, the pawn on c5 is never really a weakness. Like say knight f8, b5 is played. Here the pawn is guarded on c5 by the pawns on d4 and the entire chain itself. So that's why it's really critical that in this position black tries to do something very active, and that line with knight f8 takes here, e6, knight e5, bishop e2, king e6, black is fine, because now none of the queenside ideas are very dangerous because the pawn on c5 will be weak. Again, very advanced concepts is not something straightforward or basic, so I'm trying to do the best I can to explain this, but it's a very complex situation here in this sort of late middle game, early end game. After bishop c4, we got pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, and now knight f8. Now the biggest issue for black here is that white now has a 4-on-3 majority on the queen side. If white could somehow push the pawn through to say d6, white would be close to winning here. Additionally, let's just say after d5, if this, let's just say a trade ever occurs, just ignoring this position here, white will still have a 3-on-2 on the queen side, and black can never really push these pawns to the center of the board. If you push f4, for example, you'll always lose the pawn on e4. You can't really push e3, so the pawns aren't very mobile, and white's always going to have a queenside majority here. So it's very tricky to play. However, after knight f8, we get this interesting move f3, which is also one of the ways you can play. You could perhaps go rook b1 and b5, or maybe even a4 with b5, but Hans goes for the very thematic idea with f3, and after pawn takes rook f1, white is basically trying to argue that I still keep the 4-on-3 here in the center. I can still play a4, b5, potentially d5, but now you definitely aren't going to get any play in the center of the board, because you can not push the f pawn. If you push f4 and rook takes f3, pawn at f4 will fall very shortly. So after rook a f1, we get king d7. Idea very simple. Black still has this bad knight that he's trying to activate, and so the only way to bring it into the game is via e6. And if you were to go knight e6 right here, after rook to e1, you will lose some material. You can maybe go rook d5, but after takes, I don't know, let's just say rook f1, white should be winning here. And if you don't play rook d5, I will just capture the knight on e6 with the rook or the bishop and be completely winning. So king d7 is a very logical move. We got rook takes f3 being played here, and now knight to e6. Of course, with the king not on e7, there are no ideas with pins anymore along the e5. So rook e1 is played here by Hans. We get knight to c7. Now black's knight is on a much better square here. You have access to both b5 and d5 potentially, so black can maybe hold the position back. Computer actually thinks here that black should be okay. So after knight c7, we get rook h3, and now Lenderman plays rook d8, a very good move here to exchange the rooks. Again, white has the active rooks here. Black has a rook on h8 that's kind of active because it ties the rook down the pawn. It ties the rook on h3 down to the pawn on h4. But white can always shift view and move the rook from h3 to e3 and try to stack on the e file. So with less pieces on the board, there should be better drawing chances. So we get rook e8, rook takes e8, knight takes e8 is played, or sorry, not knight takes e8. We get king e8. If black were to play knight takes e8 here, there might be an idea with bishop f7 winning the pawn on g6. Or even ideas like d5, once again creating this classic 3-on-2 queenside majority. You still have ideas like bishop f7 going after the pawn on g6 as well. And the knight on e8 still very passive, no access to either f6 or the d6 square. So we get king takes e8 played by Lenderman. Again, logical stops bishop f7, and the knight on c7 also prevents both the pawn pushes with b5 and d5 here. So now we get a4 being played by Hans. An excellent move here, by the way, understanding that the only chance for white to try and create play is to go b5 and try to do something on the queen side, specifically on the b file here. Because if you look at this position here, let's just say a4 a6, I'll just say a5 is played. In this position, you can't ever really force d5 through, because with the knight on c7 and the pawn on c6, you're never able to remove either of these pieces, and so you don't have a breakthrough in the center here. So the only chance you have here is to try and break through on the queen side with b5 and potentially king b4, king a5, and maybe some kind of rook b3 here. So king d7 is played here by Lenderman. Now a6 was a move that could have been played, but to the human eye it looks incredibly scary here, because white can go for a thematic sacrifice with b5, and after takes bishop b3 here. On first glance it looks really scary. Black is up a pawn temporarily, but you have two sets of double pawns, and white is going to push d5 and d6 here, and optically it looks like black would just lose the game. Now of course, computers being so good and much better than humans, they show zero fear, and they say after king d7 d5 here, there's a very nice motif with knight to a6 targeting the pawn on c5, and after king to d4 here, black can now go rook e8 with the idea of rook e4 check, and after bishop c2 to prevent that, black can play knight b4. If you go back to b1 in this position, now I go rook e1, rook to b3, and now this nice move, rook to d1 check, trying to win the pawn on d5. If you move the king anywhere, I just take, and I'm up a couple of pawns, and I should win. And if you go bishop d3, I can very simply just trade into the endgame, and with the wide peepos here, the king cannot stop both the pawns. King is not in the box, or the square as they say. After king f4, b3, king e3, b2, black will be able to queen the pawn and win the game. So again, from a distance and with the assistance of a computer, it's very easy to see that a6 is a playable move, but optically over the board it just feels incredibly scary, because you really do worry about these pawns in the center advancing, and you could just lose the game. So Lenderman plays king d7, another sensible move. We got pawn to b5 played here, knight to e6, trying to go after the pawn on g5 because of the pin. If white plays a move like, let's just say a random move like bishop f, not bishop f1, sorry, let's just say bishop e2 here. Now you can go knight takes g5, because after pawn takes knight, rook takes rook, black would win the game. So it's a very logical move, trying to put pressure on the pawn on d4, but also put pressure on the pawn on g5. Now here Hans finds another excellent move. He plays king to b4. And this is a very good move, because now if black plays knight takes d4, for example, you can go rook to d3, pinning the knight, and after rook takes h4, king c3, you will win this knight on d4. So black cannot take the pawn on d4. Additionally, if black tries to take the pawn on g5, now with your king very neatly tucked away on b4, there are no ideas with checks like knight e4, so you can go rook g3, and after either, let's just say knight e4, rook takes g6, white will once again be completely winning, because after rook h7, you can, many ways, probably you can just trade, go bishop e6, and then bishop takes f5, and black is in a lot of trouble. So king b4 is an excellent move here, and there's also another hidden theme, which is that white can potentially play king to a5 later on. So let's just say we get some position like this with a king on a5, there are ideas like king a6, or even ideas like rook b3 and rook b7. So this king is very, very nicely placed on the a5 square. Again, a very deep concept, not something that really will make sense on first glance, but the king is headed towards the right squares. So after we get this move king to b4, we get knight to f4 being played by Lenderman, rook to h2, king to c7 being played, trying to, I guess, sidestep checks, but also potentially trying to stop ideas like b6 or a5. And now we get a5 anyway. Pawn takes pawn is forced. If black does not trade the pawns on b5, say black plays a move like king d7, after something like b6 here, it feels really, really scary. Computer thinks you can hold with a6, but let's just say for argument's sake, there's a trade of pawns. Black is still in a lot of trouble here, because eventually white can play something like rook a2, rook a8, and rook b8. So to illustrate it, rook takes h4, rook a8, king d7, rook b8, and white will win the pawn on b7, and most likely with the connect 3 win the game. So after a5, pawn takes is pretty much forced. You can't really play a6 either. I think after a6 I can probably take, and maybe I can take a knight d5, king a4. Again, as I look at this, I feel like this might have been better than what happened in the game. Because here, even though black is down a pawn, you have this great outpost, you can push the f pawn, king is sort of on the edge of the board, and after rook b8 it feels like there might be some counterplay here, so this probably would have been a better try. However, Lenderman here chooses to take on b5, bishop takes b5 is played here, we got pawn to a6, and now he goes bishop a4. This is a rather peculiar move. Kind of surprised to see it when I was watching the game live. I thought bishop c4 was a much more logical move, just to try and force d5 and d6 through. On the other hand, putting the bishop on a4 makes a lot of sense as well, because it prevents black from ever being able to bring the rook to the e8 square and take advantage of the open e file here. So bishop a4 does prevent that, and long term white can probably still go king c4 followed by d5 and d6. So even though you're not able to push the pawn right away, you take away this very critical square and you take away an open file from the black rook. So after bishop a4, knight to e6 is played here. Now Hans goes d5. Lenderman decides to take the pawn on g5, and now Hans plays d6. And in this position, after thinking for 4 moves, we get a very big mistake from Alexander Lenderman. He plays king d8, which in effect loses the game. Now the obvious move here is to play king c8. Again, nobody knows exactly what was going through his mind. I highly doubt there's going to be any kind of interview, so we probably won't know until after the event. But king c8 is a move that he rejected. My assumption is he probably thought that after c6 takes, bishop takes c6 for some reason, maybe king c5 is coming in, maybe there's some idea of like rook e2 and rook e8. So to illustrate the point, say you play, I don't know, just some random moves to illustrate it. There might be an idea like rook e8 takes and it's not bishop d7, d7 check, forking the king and the rook, and after king c7 you make a queen. So perhaps just intuitively Lenderman felt that somehow with the king on c8 there would be some ideas like d7 checks or bishop b7s, like king c5, king b6, bishop b7. At any rate, it is a huge blunder here for one very simple reason, which is that after king d8 is played in the game, c6 occurs, we get pawn takes and king c5, and this is winning for white. But what is the difference between this and the other variation? The big difference is that with the king on c8, for example, after c6 takes king c5, black can go knight to e4 check, king takes c6, and now there's this nice move rook to d8. White cannot play rook d2 guarding the pawn because the knight on e4 will capture the rook, and white will lose his pawn on d6 here. Now again, white can probably still save the game, but there are no chances to win. So after this short think, Lenderman plays king d8, Hans plays c6, takes, and now he goes king c5. And as you'll notice, the big issue now is not only do you not have knight e4 and rook d8, but additionally white has ideas like rook b2 and rook b8 taking advantage of the open b file. So after king c5, Lenderman plays f4. Now another move that was a big blunder at the time, I was very surprised by it. Black can actually try to fight on here with a move like knight e4, and this was actually my assumption for what Lenderman probably thought he could do, which is after king c6 there are a couple different lines. The first one is that black can play g5 here, and white is winning here, but it's very, very tricky because after rook b2, knight takes d6, you have to play rook b8 check. I'll illustrate the king takes d6 line in 1 second via a different move order, because now after knight c8, white goes king b7, and if you play, let's just say rook takes h4, for example, after rook c8, king e7, bishop to c6, white should be in time to capture the pawn, move the king, and run the a pawn down the board, in particular because the bishop on c6 will capture a pawn going to f3 or a pawn trying to get to g2, and black is just a little bit too slow here. So in this position, black can also play king e7, and now after rook c8, rook takes c8, king takes c8, g takes h4, white would have to be extremely precise here and find the one winning move. There's only one move that wins. That move is a very, very beautiful move, bishop to b5, because if black takes the bishop on b5 after a6, h3, a7, h2, white queens first on a8, and white will win the game because white's queen can capture the black queen on h1. Additionally, if in this position you play, let's just say h3, I can take on a6, and after h2, bishop b7, again I'm just in time. After f4, I go a6, g5, a7, and you're one move too slow. If black could magically get an extra move, let me just illustrate the point here where it's black's move, you can go f3. Black is just in time to where you get a queen. But because of the specific moves here, after f4, a6, g5, a7, black's pawn is not on g4, so now when you go g4, I queen. You can play f3, but I can very simply sack the bishop for the 2 pawns, and then bring the queen to h1, capture the pawn in h2, and end the game. So this would have been very, very instructive to see. It would have been interesting to see if Hans could have calculated this line all the way out, because it's the only path to victory. Again, computer says it's winning, but there is only one road that leads to Rome here. Additionally, there is another variation which can occur, which is back in this position, black can play rook to h6, for example, and after rook to b2, take on d6 again. Now, if white were to play king takes d6 after g5 with a discovered check, king c5, g takes h4, the computer actually thinks this should be a draw because black is a rook behind the passed pawn. Additionally, you have 3 pawns on the king side that are rolling, and the pawn on a6 is still protected, and it's going to take time for white to try and win this. However, after knight takes d6, white has an incredible resource with rook to d2 with the pin, and now white is simply winning. If you play a move like g5, I guess I can just take, but even quite simply pawn takes pawn would also win the game, and after rook g6 I just trade, and that's all she wrote. So this is another way that's very instructive. It's winning. The third and final variation that can occur, well, I guess there is no third variation, was g5 rook b2 knight takes d6, and rook b8 would be the only way to win, because again, after king d6 I can go rook h6 check, and we transpose the aforementioned variation where black is the 3 pawns on the king side, and it will be a draw. So it's a great pity that we did not see this line on the board. I suspect that at this point Lenderman sort of realized he had done something wrong. We don't really know if the clocks were correct or not correct, but I think he suspected he'd done something wrong. He was unable to sort of regroup mentally and reset and try to find the best defense here, and he loses very quickly. He plays f4. Hans plays rook b2. Very simple idea of rook b8. Now of course your knight on g5 is also under attack because there's no pin. We get knight to e6, king takes c6, threatening rook b8 checkmate. Now knight to d4 played here by Lenderman. King d5, of course. Knight b5 is the only move. If you move the knight anywhere else, again rook b8 is checkmate, with the bishop covering d7 and the pawn on d6 covering the c7 and e7 squares. So knight b5 is played. We got bishop takes, pawn takes, and Hans plays king c6. So one last trick here, which is if you were to play a move like a6 after king d7, it's probably still winning for white, but it's tricky. And if you were to play rook takes b5, for example, you would actually lose because of rook h5 check, king c6. We trade the rooks, and now black wins by 1 tempo with f3, a6, f2, a7, and f1 is check. So black queens first and wins the game. Of course, Hans does not blunder that. He goes king c6 instead, sidestepping the check on h5. And now king e8 is played here. Hans plays king c7, and black really has 2 pawns. They're split, and white has 2 pawns going up the board. When you look at the d pawn on d6, soon to be the d7 square with the king on c7 supporting the promotion on d8, black simply can't do anything. We get king f7, and after d7 Lenderman resigns here because the only way to try and stop the pawn is king e7, and now white can play rook e2, king f7. I just queen takes, and the a pawn is simply 3 squares from queening, so the game would be over. So after d7, Hans gets a very important second victory in a row here at the tail end of the tournament, after really having what I would say has been a pretty poor result. Definitely not what he was hoping for sure. I would say this is by far and away the best game that I think he's played in the tournament. It's the only game where he's won the game cleanly. Seems like he's been in control the whole way. No real blunders. Now again, Lenderman could have defended better, but this is the first game I would say in the tournament where I feel like Hans actually did play it like a 2700 player. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap. I'm sort of getting back in the stretch of things after being in Toronto for the past 4 days. At any rate, hit that subscribe button below if you have not already, and I'll be back with more recaps and probably Title Tuesdays and all sorts of good content coming up soon. Hope you enjoyed the recap, and see everybody very soon.